The morning fog hung thick over Boston's public garden like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the awakening city. Marcus Williams pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he shuffled along the cobblestone path, his weathered shopping cart squeaking with each step. At 62, he had learned to find warmth in the smallest gestures of kindness: a discarded newspaper still crisp enough to read, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped carefully in clean paper, or the gentle morning light filtering through the ancient oak trees. But this Tuesday morning would offer something entirely different, something that would change not just his day, but his entire world. As Marcus rounded the corner near the Swanboat's dock, a soft whimpering caught his attention. There, huddled beneath a park bench, was a small, golden retriever puppy, no more than 6 months old. The little creature was trembling, its fur matted and damp from the morning dew. A torn leather collar hung loosely around its neck, and Marcus could see a silver tag catching what little sunlight penetrated the fog. "Hey there, little one," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the gentleness of a man who understood abandonment all too well. He approached slowly, extending a calloused hand that had known both hardship and hope. The puppy looked up with amber eyes that seemed to hold an ocean of trust, despite whatever ordeal had brought it to this moment. Before we continue, tell us where you're listening from today in the comments below. If you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and moments of justice, please consider subscribing. Marcus knelt on the damp ground, his knees protesting with familiar aches. "What are you doing out here all alone, buddy?" The puppy's tail gave a tentative wag, and Marcus felt his heart tighten with recognition. This little dog was lost, just like he had been for the past 3 years since losing his job at the shipyard, and, subsequently, his small apartment in Southie. The silver tag read Dodger in elegant script, followed by a phone number. Marcus pulled out his cracked flip phone, a relic from better times that he'd managed to keep active through a government assistance program. His fingers, stiff from the cold, struggled with the small buttons as he dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, then went straight to a voicemail box that was full. "Come on, Dodger," Marcus said, scooping up the puppy with surprising tenderness. "Let's get you somewhere warm while we figure this out." The little dog snuggled against his chest, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He pushed his cart toward the Boston Common, where he knew a small cafe owner named Elena sometimes let him sit on the outdoor bench with a cup of coffee on particularly cold mornings. Elena Vasquez had immigrated from Guatemala 15 years ago and understood what it meant to feel invisible in a big city. She had never judged Marcus for his circumstances, and he hoped she might help him figure out what to do about Dodger. The puppy seemed to sense they were heading somewhere safe. Its trembling subsided, and it began to take in the sights and sounds of the city with curious eyes. Marcus found himself talking to his new companion as they walked. "You know, boy, I bet someone's looking for you. Probably worried sick. A beautiful pup like you doesn't just end up alone without someone missing you terribly." As they approached Elena's cafe, Sunrise Coffee, Marcus could smell the rich aroma of fresh brewed coffee and warm pastries. The familiar scent reminded him of Saturday mornings in his old life, when he would sit at his kitchen table reading the sports section while his wife Sarah made pancakes. Those memories came less frequently now, but when they did, they carried both comfort and pain. Elena spotted him through the window and waved, her face brightening with genuine warmth. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron, but stopped short when she saw the bundle of golden fur in his arms. "Marcus, ¿quién es este pequeño?" she asked, reverting to Spanish in her surprise before catching herself. "Who is this little one? Found him under a bench in the garden," Marcus explained, adjusting his hold on Dodger. "He's got a tag, but the number goes to a full voicemail. I was hoping maybe I could sit here for a bit while I figure out what to do next." Elena's expression softened even more, if that was possible. She had 3 dogs of her own and understood the bond between human and canine. Of course. Come, sit. I'll bring you both something warm." She disappeared back into the cafe, leaving Marcus and Dodger on the small outdoor bench that had become his informal office for handling the bureaucracy of homelessness. The morning rush was beginning in earnest now. Business people in expensive suits hurried past with their phones pressed to their ears, tourists consulted maps and guidebooks, and joggers carved paths through the slower-moving pedestrians. Most barely glanced at Marcus, which was how he preferred it. Invisibility had become a form of protection over the years, but Dodger was drawing attention. The puppy's natural charm and obvious distress created ripples in the usual urban anonymity. A few passers-by slowed their steps, and Marcus could see the question in their eyes. Was this man taking care of the dog, or taking advantage somehow? He had learned to read these subtle judgments, the way concern could quickly turn to suspicion when you looked like he did. Elena returned with a steaming cup of coffee for Marcus and a small bowl of water for Dodger. "I also brought some leftover breakfast sausage," she said quietly, producing a small paper plate. "Dogs need to eat too, Si." Marcus felt his throat tighten with gratitude. "Elena, I don't know how to thank you. I'll keep trying the number." Someone must be looking for him. As if understanding the conversation, Dodger perked up at the mention of food and began eating with the enthusiasm only puppies could muster. Between bites, he would look up at Marcus with those trusting amber eyes, as if to say, "I knew you'd take care of me." "He likes you," Elena observed, settling onto the bench beside them for a moment before the morning rush demanded her attention. "Animals, they know good people. They can sense the heart, you know." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure he still qualified as a good person. The streets had a way of wearing down your sense of goodness, reducing life to basic survival instincts. But holding this small, vulnerable creature reminded him of who he used to be, who he might still be underneath the layers of disappointment and defeat. After Elena went back inside, Marcus continued trying the number on Dodger's tag. Each attempt yielded the same result, a full voicemail box. He began to wonder if the number was even current, or if perhaps Dodger had been lost for longer than it appeared. The puppy seemed healthy enough, though thin, but his collar was worn and the tag slightly tarnished. "What's your story, boy?" Marcus murmured, stroking the soft fur behind Dodger's ears. "How'd you end up out there all alone?" A young woman jogging past in expensive athletic wear slowed as she approached their bench. She wore noise-canceling headphones and the kind of designer workout clothes that cost more than Marcus spent on food in a month. He prepared for the usual interaction, a look of pity, maybe $1 pressed into his hand with hurried good intentions, then a quick departure. Instead, she stopped completely and removed her headphones. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying genuine concern rather than condescension. "Is that puppy okay? He looks like he might be lost." Marcus looked up, surprised by her directness. "Yes, ma'am. I found him this morning under a bench in the garden. I'm trying to reach his owners, but the phone number just goes to voicemail." The woman, who appeared to be in her early 30s with kind eyes and an athlete's posture, knelt down to Dodger's level. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the puppy. "Of course." Marcus watched as she gently examined Dodger's collar and tag, her movements practiced and confident. "This is a good quality collar," she observed. "And look at his teeth and coat. This is a well-cared-for dog. He hasn't been on his own for very long." She looked up at Marcus with newfound respect. "You probably saved his life finding him when you did." Something in her tone made Marcus sit straighter. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to him as if his actions mattered, as if he had done something worthwhile. "I was thinking about taking him to the police station, or maybe the animal shelter," Marcus said. "But I wasn't sure if they'd just, if no one claimed him." The woman understood immediately. She had volunteered at shelters before and knew the grim statistics about unclaimed animals. "Have you tried posting on social media? Or maybe calling some of the local veterinary offices? If someone's missing a puppy like this, they're probably calling everywhere." Marcus felt a flash of embarrassment about his technological limitations. His flip phone could barely handle calls, let alone navigate the digital world that everyone else seemed to inhabit so effortlessly. But before he could explain, the woman was already pulling out her smartphone. "Would it be okay if I took a picture of him? I can post it on a few lost pet groups online. Sometimes that works faster than official channels." She paused, seeming to realize something important. "I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Chen." "Marcus Williams?" he replied, touched by her willingness to help a stranger. "And this is Dodger," according to his tag. Sarah took several photos of Dodger, capturing his distinctive markings and the information on his tag. As she worked, she kept up a gentle stream of conversation that put Marcus at ease. She wasn't treating him like a problem to be solved or a charity case to be managed. She was simply treating him like a person who happened to be in a difficult situation. "I run a small nonprofit that connects resources with people who need them," Sarah explained as she typed on her phone. "Nothing fancy, just community organizing, really. But I've got a pretty good network. We'll find this little guy's family." Marcus watched her work, struck by the casual efficiency with which she navigated between different apps and websites. Within minutes, she had posted Dodger's photo to 3 different lost pet groups, shared it on her own social media accounts, and started a list of local veterinary offices to call. "You know," Sarah said, looking up from her phone, "there's a coffee shop about 2 blocks from here that's really dog-friendly. The owner's a friend of mine, and they have Wi-Fi if we need to do more searching. Would you want to head over there? Dodger might be more comfortable inside, and we could make some calls." Marcus hesitated. The offer was generous, but it also meant stepping into a space where he might not be welcome, where his appearance might make other customers uncomfortable. He had learned to stick to places where his presence wouldn't disrupt anyone else's day. Sarah seemed to sense his reluctance. "It's called Common Ground," she said gently. "The owner's name is Mike, and he specifically designed it as a place where everyone's welcome. He's got a big sign that says, 'All walks of life walk through these doors.' He means it too." Common Ground Coffee lived up to its name the moment Marcus stepped through the door. The walls were decorated with photos of the neighborhood throughout different eras, showing the same streets filled with faces of every color and background Boston had to offer. Jazz played softly overhead, and the mismatched furniture gave the place a comfortable, lived-in feel that reminded Marcus of his grandmother's living room. Mike, the owner, was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with graying temples and hands that showed the calluses of real work. He looked up from behind the counter as Sarah entered with Marcus and Dodger, and his face immediately lit up with recognition. "Sarah, good to see you, girl. And who's this handsome fellow?" His attention went straight to Dodger, who had perked up at the warmth and wonderful smells emanating from the kitchen. "This is Marcus," Sarah said, her introduction natural and unforced. "He found this little guy abandoned this morning, and we're trying to track down the owners." Mike came around the counter and extended his hand to Marcus with the kind of straightforward respect that spoke of genuine character. "Mike Rodriguez, welcome to Common Ground. Let me get you both something warm, and we'll see what we can do about reuniting this pup with his people." As they settled at a table near the window, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way other customers glanced over with curiosity rather than judgment. An elderly woman at a corner table smiled and gave Dodger a little wave. A young father with his toddler pointed out the puppy to his child, who clapped with delight. The atmosphere was exactly what the name promised. Common ground where different worlds could intersect peacefully. Sarah had her laptop out and was already expanding their search efforts. "I've got responses to the posts already," she said, scrolling through messages. "Nothing that matches Dodger yet, but people are sharing the photos. That's good. It means more eyes are looking." Marcus sipped his coffee. Real coffee, not the instant kind he usually managed to afford, and watched Sarah work. He was beginning to understand that she was one of those people who attacked problems with systematic thoroughness. She had spreadsheets, contact lists, and what appeared to be an entire network of people willing to help at a moment's notice. "Marcus," she said, looking up from her screen, "can you tell me exactly where you found him? The more specific we can be about the location, the better chance we have of someone recognizing the area and maybe remembering seeing him." "It was near the Swan Boats dock, under the bench closest to the path that leads toward Arlington Street," Marcus replied. "He was pretty well hidden. If I hadn't heard him whimpering, I might have walked right past." Sarah typed notes as he spoke. "And what time was this?" "Maybe 7:30? The fog was still pretty thick, so it was early." "That's helpful. If he was lost overnight, his owners are probably frantic by now. Dogs don't usually wander that far from home unless something scared them or they've been out for a while." Mike appeared at their table with a small plate of scrambled eggs. "All in the house," he said, placing it in front of Dodger. "Puppy looks like he could use some protein." As Dodger eagerly attacked the eggs, Marcus felt compelled to explain something that had been weighing on him. "I want you both to know I'm not trying to keep him or anything like that. I know how it might look, me being in my situation, but this little guy belongs with his real family." Sarah looked up from her laptop with surprise, and Mike paused in, wiping down the neighboring table. The honesty in Marcus's voice, the vulnerability of acknowledging how others might perceive his motives, touched something in both of them. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "I never thought for a second that you were trying to take advantage. What you did this morning was heroic. You saw a creature in need and helped, even though you're dealing with your own challenges. That says everything about who you are." Mike nodded in agreement. "Brother, I've been in this neighborhood for 15 years. I've seen how people treat each other, and I've seen how they treat animals. What you did today is exactly what any decent person should do, and the fact that you did it despite your circumstances makes it even more meaningful." Their words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He had spent so long being invisible, being judged, being dismissed, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as fully human. His eyes burned with unexpected emotion, and he had to clear his throat before he could respond. "Thank you," he managed. "Both of you. It's been a while since anyone talked to me like that." The moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing. She glanced at the screen and her face lit up. "We might have something," she said, answering the call. "Hello? Yes, this is Sarah. You saw the post about the golden retriever puppy?" Marcus leaned forward, his heart suddenly racing. Dodger looked up from his eggs, seeming to sense the shift in energy around the table. "Can you describe him?" Sarah continued, grabbing a pen. "Uh-huh. Golden fur, about 6 months old. Does he have a distinctive white patch on his chest?" "Yes." "And his name is Dodger?" She looked at Marcus with growing excitement. "Yes, we have him. He's safe." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. Relief that they had found Dodger's family, joy that the little guy would be going home, and an unexpected sadness at the thought of saying goodbye to his new friend. "The owner's name is Jennifer Walsh," Sarah explained as she hung up. "She lives in Back Bay, about 6 blocks from where you found him. She's been looking for him all night. Apparently he got spooked by fireworks last evening and bolted out the door when someone was leaving. She's been calling shelters and walking the streets since midnight." "Fireworks?" Mike asked. "But it's Tuesday." "Probably some kind of private celebration," Sarah said. "Rich neighborhood, you know. People can afford to set them off whenever they want." She looked at Marcus. "She's on her way over." She sounded like she was crying when I told her Dodger was safe. As they waited, Marcus found himself memorizing everything about Dodger. The way his ears perked up when he heard interesting sounds. How he would put his paw on Marcus's leg when he wanted attention. The soft warmth of his fur. He had only known this little creature for a few hours, but already the thought of letting go felt like losing a piece of himself. Sarah seemed to understand what he was going through. "You know, Marcus, what you gave Dodger this morning wasn't just rescue. You gave him comfort and care when he was scared and alone. That's something his owner will never forget." Jennifer Walsh burst through the door of Common Ground Coffee like a force of nature. She was a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed even in her obvious distress, with tear-streaked makeup and hair that spoke of a sleepless night spent searching the streets. Her eyes swept the cafe frantically until they landed on their table, and specifically on the small golden puppy who had lifted his head at the sound of the door. "Dodger!" she cried, her voice breaking with relief and joy. The puppy's response was immediate and electric. His entire body began to wiggle with excitement, his tail wagging so hard it seemed like it might propel him right off Marcus's lap. He began a series of joyful yips that brought smiles to everyone in the coffee shop. Marcus gently set Dodger on the floor, and the puppy raced across the space between them, launching himself into Jennifer's arms with the pure happiness that only a dog reunited with its beloved human can express. She held him tight, tears streaming down her face as she buried her nose in his fur, and whispered things that only the two of them could understand. The entire cafe had stopped to watch the reunion. Even the most jaded city dwellers couldn't help but smile at the obvious love between the woman and her dog. Mike wiped at his eyes with his apron, and Sarah had her phone out, capturing the moment with the instinct of someone who understood that some memories deserve to be preserved. After a few minutes of pure celebration, Jennifer looked up and around the table, her eyes still bright with tears but now focused on the people who had made this moment possible. "Which one of you found him?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah gestured toward Marcus. "This is Marcus Williams. He's the one who found Dodger this morning and has been taking care of him." Jennifer turned to face Marcus fully, and he saw her take in his appearance, the worn clothes, the weathered face, the shopping cart visible through the window. But instead of the judgment or pity he had come to expect, her expression showed only gratitude, and something that looked like awe. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I don't know how to thank you. I've been walking the streets all night looking for him. The police said they'd keep an eye out," the shelter said to call back this afternoon. "Everyone told me to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst." She hugged Dodger tighter. "But you found him." You kept him safe. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unused to being the center of such positive attention. I just did what anyone would do, ma'am. He was scared and alone. I've been there myself. The simple honesty of his response seemed to affect Jennifer even more deeply. She looked at him with a new kind of recognition, the kind that saw past circumstances to character. No, she said firmly. Not everyone would have done what you did. Not everyone would have cared enough to spend their morning trying to find his family, instead of just dropping him at a shelter. Not everyone would have given him food and comfort when they barely have enough for themselves. The last observation hung in the air with uncomfortable accuracy. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but Jennifer wasn't finished. Sarah told me on the phone that you've been calling veterinary offices and posting online, that you spent hours of your day taking care of a stranger's dog. She paused, seeming to struggle with emotion. Mr. Williams, my husband died 2 years ago. Dodger is all I have left of the life we built together. David picked him out as a surprise for my birthday, just a month before the cancer took him. This little guy has been my constant companion through the worst time of my life. Marcus felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. He understood loss, understood the way grief could make you cling to whatever connections remained. When Dodger ran off last night during those fireworks, Jennifer continued, I thought I was going to lose the last piece of David the first had left. I've been praying all night that someone kind would find him, someone who would see that he was loved and cared for. I never imagined that person would be someone who needed kindness themselves. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope that looked thick with bills. Please, let me give you a reward. It's the least I can do. Marcus held up his hand immediately. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I can't take your money. I didn't help Dodger for a reward. I helped him because he needed help. Jennifer's face showed surprise, and then something that looked like profound respect. She glanced at Sarah, who nodded as if to confirm that yes, this was really the kind of person Marcus was. Mr. Williams, Jennifer said slowly, you're quite an extraordinary man. Before Marcus could respond, the door to the cafe chimed again. This time, a man in his 30s entered, wearing jeans and a Red Sox t-shirt, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He carried himself with an easy confidence, but Marcus noticed the way his eyes quickly scanned the room, as if checking for recognition or unwanted attention. The newcomer approached the counter and ordered a coffee from Mike, speaking in a voice that was somehow familiar. Marcus found himself studying the man's profile, trying to place where he might have heard that voice before. There was something about his bearing, the way he moved, that suggested someone accustomed to public attention but trying to avoid it. Sarah had noticed him too, and Marcus saw her eyes widen slightly with recognition. She leaned over and whispered something to Jennifer, who glanced toward the man at the counter with surprise. No way, Jennifer whispered back. The man had received his coffee and was looking for a place to sit when his gaze fell on their table. Specifically, on Dodger, who was now contentedly lying across Jennifer's lap, still exhausted from his adventure and the emotional reunion. A smile crossed the stranger's face, the kind of genuine expression that came from someone who loved dogs. He approached their table with the casual friendliness of someone accustomed to talking to strangers. Beautiful golden retriever, he said to Jennifer. Looks like he's had quite an adventure. He was lost all night, Jennifer replied, her voice still carrying traces of the emotion from their reunion. This gentleman found him this morning, and has been taking care of him ever since. She gestured toward Marcus with obvious pride and gratitude. The stranger looked at Marcus with interest, taking in his appearance without judgment. That was good of you, he said simply. A lot of people would have just kept walking. Marcus found himself looking more closely at the man's face, visible now beneath the brim of his cap. Something about his features, his voice, the way he carried himself was tugging at his memory. He had the uncomfortable feeling that he should know who this was, but couldn't quite place him. I'm Chris, by the way, the man said, extending his hand to Marcus. Chris Evans. The name hit Marcus like a gentle wave of recognition, but it was Sarah's sharp intake of breath that confirmed what his mind was struggling to process. Chris Evans. Captain America himself was standing at their table in a South End coffee shop, shaking hands with Marcus as if they were just two regular guys talking about dogs. Marcus had seen the Marvel movies, of course. Even living on the streets didn't mean being completely cut off from popular culture. There were shelters with TV rooms, libraries with computers, and it was hard to avoid the biggest movies in the world entirely. But seeing Chris Evans in person, without the costume and dramatic lighting, was somehow both more and less than seeing him on screen. "Chris Evans," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "The actor?" Chris smiled with the kind of warmth that made it clear he didn't mind being recognized, even when he was obviously trying to have a quiet morning. "That's me, though right now I'm just a guy who loves dogs and appreciates people who help them." Jennifer was staring between Marcus and Chris with an expression of amazement. "This is unreal," she murmured. "My dog gets rescued by a hero, and then Captain America shows up to thank him personally." "Well, when you put it like that," Chris laughed, "it does sound like something out of a movie." He looked at Marcus with genuine interest. "But the real hero here is Marcus. What you did for this little guy, that's what matters." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the moment. In the span of a few hours, he had gone from his usual invisible existence to being thanked by both a grateful dog owner and one of America's most famous actors. It was almost too much to process. "It really wasn't anything special," Marcus said, feeling the need to deflect the attention. Anyone would have done the same thing. "I don't think that's true," Chris replied, pulling up a chair without asking, as if he intended to stay and talk rather than just exchange pleasantries. "I've been around enough to know that kindness isn't automatic. It's a choice, and you made the right one." Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, but Marcus could see her mind working. She was looking at Chris with the expression of someone forming an idea, the same look she'd had when she started organizing their search for Dodger's owner. "Chris," she said carefully, "can I ask what brought you to this particular coffee shop this morning?" Chris took a sip of his coffee and glanced around the cafe. "I'm in Boston visiting family, and I heard about this place from a friend. Said it was the kind of neighborhood spot where you could just be a regular person for a while." He gestured toward the diverse mix of customers, the comfortable atmosphere, the lack of pretension. She was right. "And you just happened to walk in on this reunion?" Sarah pressed gently. "Pure coincidence," Chris confirmed. "Though I have to say, it's made my day a lot more interesting." He looked at Marcus. "Can I ask you something? What's your story? How did you end up being the kind of person who stops to help a scared puppy when a lot of people would just keep walking?" The question was asked without prying curiosity or condescension. Chris had the manner of someone who was genuinely interested in people, who understood that everyone had a story worth hearing. Marcus found himself wanting to answer honestly, despite his usual reluctance to share personal details with strangers. There was something about Chris's presence, not his fame, but his evident sincerity, that made Marcus feel safe being open. "I used to work at the shipyard," Marcus began slowly. "Had a house in Southie, a wife, a regular life. Then the yard closed down, Sarah got sick, and—" He paused, the familiar weight of that story settling on his shoulders. "By the time she passed, we'd lost everything trying to pay for treatments insurance wouldn't cover. I've been on the streets for about 3 years now." The table was quiet for a moment, absorbing the stark reality of how quickly a life could change. Chris nodded with the kind of understanding that suggested he'd heard similar stories before. "I'm sorry," Chris said simply, "for your loss and for everything you've been through since." "The thing is," Marcus continued, "when you're in a situation like mine, you become invisible to most people. They look right through you, or they cross the street to avoid you. But this little guy," he gestured toward Dodger, who was now dozing peacefully in Jennifer's arms, "he didn't care what I looked like or where I lived. He just needed help, and I could give it to him." Jennifer wiped at her eyes again, clearly moved by Marcus's words. "You saved him," she said softly. "In every way that matters, you saved him." Chris was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with the kind of focused attention that made it clear he was thinking about something important. When he spoke, his voice carried a new intensity. "Marcus, can I ask you about your situation? Are you getting the help you need? Are there services, programs, anything that might help you get back on your feet?" Sarah leaned forward, her professional instincts kicking in. "I work in community outreach, and I can tell you that the system is incredibly difficult to navigate, especially if you don't have a permanent address or reliable phone service. There are resources, but they're fragmented and underfunded." "What would it take?" Chris asked, directing the question to both Sarah and Marcus. "Hypothetically, what would it take to help someone in Marcus's situation transition off the streets?" Marcus felt a familiar wariness creep in. He had been through this before. Well-meaning people who wanted to help but didn't understand the complexity of homelessness, who thought it was just a matter of finding a job or filling out the right forms. "It's not just about money," Marcus said carefully, "though that's part of it. You need an address to get a job, but you need a job to afford an address. You need identification documents that are hard to replace when you lose them. You need mental health support, because living like this does things to your head. You need medical care because the streets are hard on your body. And you need people who believe you're worth saving, which is rarer than you might think." Chris absorbed this information with the kind of focus that suggested he was filing away every detail. "And you, Marcus? What would you need specifically?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. He wasn't used to someone asking about his needs as if they might actually be willing and able to help meet them. Marcus began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the possibility that this might be more than just a theoretical conversation. "I'd need help getting my documents together. Maybe a place to stay while I looked for work. I'm a good worker when I get the chance. I know boats, I'm good with my hands. I just need someone to give me a shot." Chris nodded slowly, and Marcus could see something shifting in his expression, as if he was making a decision. "Marcus," Chris said, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that had made him perfect for playing a superhero, "I want to help, not just with words or good intentions, but with real, practical help. Would you be open to that?" Marcus felt his heart rate increase. The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything he had imagined when he woke up that morning, that he struggled to process it as real. What do you mean exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious. 3 years on the streets had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. Chris said, pulling out his phone, "I'd like to make some calls. I have friends in Boston, people who work in social services, housing, employment, people who can cut through the red tape that usually takes months to navigate." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding and excitement. "Chris, are you talking about what I think you're talking about?" "I'm talking about getting Marcus off the streets," Chris said simply. "Today. This week. However long it takes to do it right." Jennifer had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. "This is incredible," she whispered. "Marcus, do you understand what he's offering?" But Marcus was struggling with a complex mix of emotions. Hope warred with disbelief. Gratitude battled with a deep-seated fear of disappointment. He had been let down by so many promises, so many systems, so many people who meant well but couldn't follow through. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" Chris was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of honesty that revealed something personal and important. "Because I can," he said simply. "And because you did something for Dodger this morning that shows exactly the kind of person you are. You saw someone in need and helped them, even though you barely had anything to give. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He paused, glancing around the table at Sarah and Jennifer, both of whom were watching this conversation with rapt attention. "But also," Chris continued, "because I've been incredibly lucky in my life. I've had opportunities and success that most people never get. With that comes a responsibility to help when I can. And right now, I can help you." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes for the second time that day. The simple generosity of the offer, the matter-of-fact way Chris was treating it as an obvious choice rather than an extraordinary gesture, was overwhelming. "What about work?" Marcus asked, his practical mind trying to understand how this could possibly work out. "I haven't had a real job in 3 years. My resume has a pretty big gap." "Let me worry about that," Chris said. "I know people in construction, maritime services, logistics. People who care more about whether someone shows up and does good work than about gaps in employment history." Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Marcus, this is amazing. Do you understand how rare this opportunity is?" But Marcus was still processing, still struggling to believe this was really happening. "I don't want charity," he said quietly. "I want to earn my way back." Chris's respect for Marcus seemed to deepen even further. "That's exactly what I'm offering. A chance to earn your way back. Not a handout, but a hand up. Someone to help you navigate the system, make connections, get past the barriers that keep people trapped." Mike, who had been discreetly listening from behind the counter, approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I couldn't help overhearing." Marcus, I've seen you around the neighborhood for months. You've never caused trouble, never been anything but respectful. If Mr. Evans here is offering you a chance, you should take it." Jennifer nodded emphatically. "Marcus, you saved my dog. You saved the most important thing in my world right now. If someone wants to help you in return, that's not charity. That's the universe trying to balance things out." Marcus looked around the table at these people who had been strangers just hours ago and were now offering to change his life. The magnitude of the moment was almost too much to bear. "Okay," he said finally, his voice shaking slightly. "Okay, yes. I'd like your help." Chris smiled, and Marcus could see why directors had cast him as Captain America. There was something inherently hopeful and determined about his expression, as if he could see the solution to any problem if he just looked hard enough. "Great," Chris said, already pulling up contacts on his phone. "Let me start making some calls. Sarah, can you help coordinate? You know the local services better than I do." "Absolutely," Sarah replied, opening her laptop again. "I'm already thinking about housing options, employment services, document recovery. We can have a plan in place by this afternoon." As Chris stepped away to make his first call, Marcus found himself alone at the table with Sarah, Jennifer, and Dodger. The puppy had woken up and was looking at Marcus with those trusting amber eyes, as if he somehow understood that something important was happening. "You know," Jennifer said softly, stroking Dodger's fur, "when David was dying, he made me promise something. He said that when life gave me a chance to help someone the way people had helped us during his illness, I should take it. I think this might be one of those chances." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a business card. "I run a small consulting firm. It's not much, but if you need character references, job recommendations, anything like that, I want you to call me." Marcus took the card with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Walsh, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help," she replied simply. "Say you'll believe that you deserve good things to happen to you." That last part hit Marcus harder than anything else. After 3 years of being invisible, of being treated as a problem to be managed or avoided, the idea that he deserved good things felt almost revolutionary. Chris returned to the table, his face animated with the energy of someone who had found solutions to seemingly impossible problems. "Okay," he said, sitting back down. "I've got good news. My friend Rebecca runs a transitional housing program in Cambridge. She has a spot available immediately. It's basically a small apartment where you can stay for up to 6 months while you get back on your feet." Marcus felt his breathing quicken. "Immediately? Like, today?" "Today," Chris confirmed. "And I talked to Tom Morrison. He runs Morrison Marine Services down at the harbor. They do boat maintenance and repair. He says if you really know boats like you claim, he'll give you a trial period starting Monday." The speed with which Chris was moving, the way he was turning impossible dreams into concrete plans, left Marcus feeling dizzy with possibility. It was too much, too fast, too good to be true. "What's the catch?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "There has to be a catch." Chris leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with those intelligent eyes that had served him well in dozens of complex roles. "The catch is that you have to do the work. You have to show up, follow through, make the choices that will keep you moving forward. I can open doors, but you have to walk through them." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And you have to accept help when you need it. That's often the hardest part for people in your situation, admitting that you can't do everything alone." Marcus thought about that morning, about finding Dodger scared and alone under a park bench. He thought about how natural it had felt to help, how right it had seemed to care for something vulnerable. Maybe it was time to let himself be cared for in return. "I can do that," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I want to do that." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and logistics that Marcus could never have navigated alone. Chris had somehow mobilized an entire network of people who seemed to specialize in solving exactly the kinds of problems that had kept Marcus trapped on the streets. Rebecca from the Transitional Housing Program arrived at the coffee shop with a folder full of forms and a warm smile that reminded Marcus of his late wife. She explained the program with the patience of someone who understood that hope could be as overwhelming as despair. "The apartment is furnished," she explained, showing Marcus photos on her tablet. "Small but clean. You'll have your own bathroom, kitchenette, and most importantly, your own address. That alone will open doors that have been closed to you." Tom Morrison, the marine services contractor, had driven over from the harbor to meet Marcus in person. He was a weathered man in his 60s who spoke with the direct honesty of someone who had spent his life working with his hands. "Chris says you know boats," Tom said, studying Marcus with the appraising look of an experienced employer. "That true?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "Worked at the shipyard for 12 years before it closed. Small boat maintenance, engine repair, some electrical work. I can handle most anything that floats." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good. I don't care where you've been sleeping or what you've been through. I care whether you show up on time and do good work. Think you can manage that?" "Yes, sir, I can." "Then we'll start you Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. 40 hours a week to start, more if you prove yourself. Fair wage, benefits after 90 days if things work out." The conversation was so straightforward, so free of the usual complications and barriers Marcus had encountered, that he almost couldn't believe it was real. But Tom's firm handshake and Rebecca's completed paperwork were concrete proof that this was actually happening. Sarah had been working her own network, making calls to social services offices and legal aid organizations. "I've got appointments set up for you tomorrow," she told Marcus, consulting her detailed notes. "DMV to get your license renewed, Social Security office to get a replacement card, and a legal clinic that will help with any outstanding issues." Jennifer had been quiet through most of these arrangements, but as the afternoon wore on, Marcus noticed her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Finally, as the others were wrapping up their business, she approached him. "Marcus," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, ma'am. Do you have any family? Anyone who might want to know that things are turning around for you?" The question hit an old wound that Marcus usually kept carefully buried. "I had a brother in California," he said slowly. "Haven't spoken to him since Sarah's funeral. He offered to help then, but I wasn't ready to accept that my life had changed so completely. Pride, I guess. Stupid pride." Jennifer nodded with understanding. "After David died, I pushed away a lot of people too. Grief makes you do things that don't make sense later." She pulled out her phone. "What's his name? Your brother?" "Daniel. Daniel Williams. He lives in San Diego, works for an engineering firm there. But I don't even know if he'd want to hear from me after all this time." "There's only one way to find out," Jennifer said gently. "And I think he'd want to know that his brother is getting back on his feet." While Jennifer worked on tracking down Daniel's contact information, Chris was dealing with a different kind of logistics, the media attention that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I want to be careful about this," he explained to Marcus. "If word gets out about what happened here today, it could turn into a circus. Reporters, photographers, people wanting to turn your story into a headline. That's not fair to you, and it's not what this is about." Marcus appreciated the consideration more than he could express. The idea of his lowest moments being broadcast as inspiration for others made him deeply uncomfortable. "On the other hand," Chris continued, "if you're comfortable with it, telling your story might help other people. There are a lot of folks out there in situations like yours who could use hope, could use examples of how things can turn around." "Let me get settled first," Marcus said. "Let me prove to myself that this is real and lasting before we think about helping other people." "Smart," Chris agreed, one step at a time. As the sun began to set outside Common Ground Coffee, Marcus looked around at the scene that had become his temporary command center. Rebecca was finalizing his housing paperwork. Sarah was coordinating his appointments. Tom was explaining the details of his new job. Jennifer was trying to reconnect him with his estranged brother. And Chris was managing it all with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to organizing complex projects. Mike had closed the cafe to other customers, not wanting to disrupt what he clearly recognized as an extraordinary moment. He kept everyone supplied with coffee and food, refusing payment and insisting that some days were more important than business. "You know what strikes me about all this?" Mike said to Marcus as they had a quiet moment together. "It started with kindness. You showed kindness to a scared animal, and look how it's rippling out. Sometimes I think that's how the world really changes, not through grand gestures, but through small acts of decency that inspire other people to be decent too." Marcus looked around the cafe at all these people who had reorganized their day around helping a stranger. "I never expected anything like this when I got up this morning." "That's the thing about kindness," Mike replied. "You never know what it might lead to." Dodger, who had been contentedly napping through most of the afternoon's activities, suddenly perked up and padded over to Marcus. The puppy put his front paws on Marcus's leg and looked up at him with those trusting amber eyes, tail wagging slowly. Marcus scratched behind Dodger's ears, feeling a bittersweet mix of joy and sadness. This little creature had been the catalyst for everything that had happened, and soon they would say goodbye. "He knows," Jennifer said softly, watching the interaction. "Dogs are smart about these things. He knows you saved him." "We saved each other," Marcus replied, surprised by the truth of it as he spoke it aloud. As if summoned by some kind of cosmic timing, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and her face lit up with excitement. "It's Daniel," she announced. "Your brother. Jennifer found him, and he wants to talk to you." Marcus felt his hands start to shake. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of shame and isolation, the prospect of reconnecting with his only remaining family felt both wonderful and terrifying. "What do I say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You say hello," Jennifer advised gently. "You tell him you're okay, and that you're sorry it took so long to call. Let him tell you how much he's missed you." Marcus took the phone with trembling fingers and stepped outside for privacy. Through the window, the others watched as he had what was clearly an emotional conversation with his brother, 3 years of separation being bridged by a phone call made possible by the kindness of strangers. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, his eyes were red, but his smile was broader than anyone had seen all day. "He's flying out tomorrow," Marcus announced to the group. "Daniel's coming to Boston tomorrow. He wants to be here when I start my new job Monday morning." The celebration that followed was quiet, but profound. This group of people who had been strangers that morning had become something like family by evening, bound together by the simple power of helping someone in need. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made Boston look like a postcard. Marcus stood outside Morrison Marine Services at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for his first day of work in 3 years. He wore new work boots purchased with an advance from Tom Morrison, clean jeans, and a work shirt provided by the Transitional Housing Program, and carried a lunch packed by his brother Daniel, who had indeed flown in from California the day before. The reunion with Daniel had been everything Marcus had hoped and more. His younger brother had aged in the 3 years since they'd last spoken, gray creeping into his dark hair and new lines around his eyes, but his embrace had been fierce and immediate. "I should have tried harder to find you," Daniel had said, tears in his eyes as they stood in Marcus's new studio apartment. "I should have kept looking." "I wasn't ready to be found," Marcus had replied honestly. "I had to find myself first." Now, as Marcus watched the harbor come alive with the morning's activity, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for the day ahead. Not just survival, but actual purpose and productivity. Tom Morrison arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, unlocking the workshop that would become Marcus's new workplace. The smell of marine paint, oil, and salt air brought back a flood of memories from his shipyard days, mostly good ones. "Ready to get started?" Tom asked, handing Marcus a cup of coffee from the thermos he carried. "More than ready," Marcus replied, and meant it. The work was exactly what his hands remembered: diagnosing engine problems, repairing hull damage, replacing worn rigging. Within an hour, Marcus was completely absorbed in the familiar rhythm of marine maintenance, his skills returning as if no time had passed at all. During his lunch break, sitting on the dock with his feet dangling over the water, Marcus received a text message from Sarah. She had taken it upon herself to coordinate check-ins with everyone who had been part of his transformation. "How's the first day going?" her message read. "Like riding a bicycle," Marcus typed back. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for letting us help. Jennifer wants to know if you'd like to have dinner this weekend. She's cooking for Daniel, too. Dodger misses you." The invitation touched Marcus deeply. These people weren't just helping him get back on his feet. They were making him part of their lives, part of a community he had thought he'd lost forever. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Chris Evans. "Heard from Tom that you're knocking it out of the park today. Proud of you, man." The casual tone of the message, the way Chris treated their friendship as an established fact rather than a celebrity doing charity work, meant more to Marcus than any amount of money could have. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself working alongside 2 other mechanics, both of whom treated him as simply another member of the team. There were no awkward questions about his past, no special treatment or pity, just the honest camaraderie of people who worked with their hands for a living. "You know," said Jake, a younger mechanic who had been showing Marcus the shop's systems, Tom's been looking for someone with real experience for months. Most of the guys who apply these days learned everything from YouTube videos. It's nice to work with someone who actually knows what they're doing. The validation felt like sunlight after years of shadow. Marcus was contributing something valuable, using skills that mattered, being appreciated for his competence rather than pitied for his circumstances. When 5 o'clock arrived, Marcus was surprised by how quickly the day had passed. He cleaned his tools with the care of someone who understood their value, said goodbye to his new coworkers, and walked the few blocks to his studio apartment with a sense of completion he hadn't felt in years. Daniel was waiting for him with takeout Chinese food and stories about his flight delays, his engineering projects, and his excitement about Marcus's new situation. They ate dinner sitting on the small couch that had come with the furnished apartment, talking like the brothers they had always been underneath the years of silence. "I called Mom's sister in Florida," Daniel said as they finished their meal. "Aunt Patricia told her what's been happening with you." Marcus tensed slightly. Their extended family had written him off after Sarah's death, unable to understand how grief and medical bankruptcy had led to homelessness. "She wants to talk to you," Daniel continued. "She said she's been praying for you every day for 3 years, hoping you were safe somewhere." The idea that people had been thinking about him, caring about him, even when he felt completely forgotten, was almost overwhelming. "Maybe next week," Marcus said. "Let me get a few more days under my belt first." That evening, Marcus called Jennifer to thank her for the dinner invitation and to ask about Dodger. The puppy was doing well, she reported, though he had spent the first few days after their reunion looking toward the door as if expecting Marcus to visit. "He's been sleeping with one of your old shirts," Jennifer admitted. "I hope you don't mind, but when we were cleaning out your shopping cart, I kept a few things I thought you might want when you got settled, including a shirt that smelled like you." Dodger claimed it immediately. The image of Dodger sleeping with his shirt, maintaining some connection to their brief but meaningful friendship, made Marcus smile. It also gave him an idea. "Jennifer," he said, "would it be okay if I visited sometime? I know he's your dog, and I don't want to confuse him, but—" "Marcus," Jennifer interrupted, "you're welcome in our home anytime. Dodger is my dog, but you'll always be his hero. Some bonds don't break just because circumstances change." As Marcus hung up the phone and prepared for his first night's sleep in his own bed in 3 years, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A scared puppy, a kind woman, a famous actor, a network of caring people, all connected by the simple decision to help when help was needed. He thought about what Mike at the coffee shop had said about kindness rippling outward. Tomorrow, Marcus decided, he would start looking for ways to ripple that kindness forward. Maybe volunteering at the shelter where he'd once stayed. Maybe helping other people navigate the systems he was learning to navigate himself. For now, though, it was enough to lie in his own bed, in his own space, with his own address and his own job to return to in the morning. It was enough to have his brother sleeping on the couch in the next room, and friends who cared about his progress. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus could have sworn he heard the distant sound of a dog barking happily somewhere in the city. Probably not Dodger, but the thought made him smile anyway. Some connections, he realized, transcended time and distance and circumstance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself, new chances to help others the way he had been helped. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Williams was home. What moment in this story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this narrative, please subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories coming.